Oh boy, this is gonna be indulgent, isn't it? I definitely had second thoughts about this video. I was thinking about it last night because I was like, you're just gonna talk about your art project for 2.5 hours. Nobody wants to hear it. But then I thought about that thought slime video I saw about how you should just finish your script and not care and just make the content and put it out there and then forget it happened. And I was like, all right, well, here we go. Hey, cats and kittens. Today we're gonna be talking about Anthromancer. What is it, right? What is Anthromancer? I use this word all the time. I've got this icon that I'm just throwing up on all my things, and it's the freaking logo on the Anthromancer channels, and if you wanna back Anthromancer on Patreon, all that stuff. But what is it? This is a physical object product that I've been working on for like 5.5 years. It is a board game, but it's a lot more than that. And we're taking it to Kickstarter, and this video is supposed to release the day before the Kickstarter launches, so I'm gonna hope that we make that deadline, but I don't know. I just work here. And I wanted to have a chance to sort of give myself some wiggle room to talk at length about some of the deeper ideas that I have for what Anthromancer is, what it means to me, how it came to be, and what I'm trying to say with it. For me, it's not just a board game, it's art. It's a piece of art, and these are my thoughts on what I'm trying to do with this piece of art. So what is Anthromancer? All right, let me open this box. This is a dirty box because this is the prototype box I've been carrying around for the last 3.5 years. So we've got a deck of cards, we've got 3 dices, and we've got, there's the back of it, that's the Fool. We'll talk about the Fool more in a minute. Here's the Arcana cards, called the Hymns, and there's the cards of the deck, and you play a game with it. There's a game you play called Mercenarium, there's an Oracle called Dragonfruit, there's a concept album, there's all this nonsense, and it's a lot. The purpose of this video is that there was a whole lot of ideas, philosophical ideas, and things I'm trying to say with Anthromancer that I was advised by some of the people who checked out our Kickstarter campaign. Maybe don't put that text wall in there. Maybe just say, hey, Anthromancer is this board game with these components, and then leave the rest for people to figure out, to discover on their own. This video is a part of that discovery process. These 15 cards here in the Anthromancer deck, they're called Hymns. They're based in some part on the major arcana of tarot, like mystical tarot. Each one has a title, a name, a Roman numeral, and guiding ideas behind them. The bookmarks of the whole system are these 2 cards in particular, the Fool and the Fox. So I want to explain what these cards in particular represent, because they sort of guide everything else in the system. And in order to really do that, I'm gonna have to go way back and talk about a bunch of seemingly unrelated nonsense, which I think is just maybe that'll just be how I do these videos. Like, here's a bunch of stuff. All right, here's my point. I wanna talk a little bit about the power of words to shape minds, language, concepts like the human spirit, and the Fool's Doctrine. I'm not trying to lay down some kind of explicit philosophy. I'm not trying to give you tenets, like here, if you do these things, this is the, I'm not trying to start a cult, guys. I swear. Please, not that. I don't want to end up like Osho. That would be weird. There are a lot of philosophical ideas in here that I am trying to express and make more popular and put in people's hands in a way that it's digestible for them. There's nothing dogmatic about Anthromancer. It's pretty, it's artistic, and I'm hoping to sort of prod people to think about things differently by putting it in their hands. So the word Anthromancer, the title of this project, when I first started using the word, this was a long time ago. This was well before I was developing games or anything like that. It was, I sort of thought it up as a fun kind of way to describe the act of promoting rock and roll shows on social media. The idea being that, like, the ability to convince people to show up at your show was a form of, like, wizardry. Like, being really good at making flyers or sending, just getting people to do a thing, to say, hey, I need you know, I need you not to just RSVP on Facebook, but to actually show up to watch our band perform, felt like some kind of secret magic that I didn't quite have figured out yet. The prefix anthro comes from, it's a shortened form of the Latin prefix anthropo, which means human. It means like of mankind. The suffix mancy,
M as in Mancy. What?
means divination. It's divination by means of whatever its prefix is. So if a necromancer, divination by means of the dead. Pyromancer, divination by means of fire. Anthromancer, divination by means of people, arguably. This is not to be confused with anthropomancy, which, much to my chagrin, about 2.5 years after I'd already bought the domain name and registered the trademark and everything, I found out that at some point in human history, there were people that literally tried to use human entrails to divine the future, which is, I guess, that's a different way to interpret what they mean by the human element, I guess. So, again, not a cult. Please don't do that. Don't. Now, I never really did anything with that term when I thought about it. You know, I think I might have written some random essay and posted it to my Facebook or something, but I never really used the term in a meaningful way until a couple of years later when I started working on this board game project. This was initially just a board game, and the game is called Mercenarium, and that's all it was gonna be. And at a certain point, it started to like become a lot more complex when I noticed that you could use the features of an oracle within the context of a board game to add all this symbolic depth and stuff. And at that point, that's when I realized that I needed like a different tier, I needed a different level to refer to the whole thing, because if the game was Mercenarium, you couldn't really call the oracle that also, it would be confusing. So I needed to come up with an umbrella for all of the different ideas contained within the board game system that I was developing. And that's when the word Anthromancer came back to my consciousness. I remember the moment. I was sitting in my apartment and I was probably a little bit high, because that's just who I am sometimes. And I remembered the word, saw the possibility of it being the umbrella term, and then the implications just got me excited. I was like, it's Anthromancer. Oh, wow, it's like you're getting people to sit around a table and play board games with their friends, and then you can help them explore their own mind with cards that mean things, and roll the dice, and what's that say about your father? It felt too good. I was like, it's cryptic, it's weird, it's like a callback to all the fantasy stuff that inspired most of this. And at that point I was like, okay, I need to get the domain name, I need to... Having the right word to describe something can be incredibly transformative. I mean, think about a mental health diagnosis. Going your whole life with a set of symptoms that other people have experienced in certain contexts. There's a treatment plan and a way to approach it and ways to cope. But until you have that word, until somebody can come to you and say, hey, maybe you have anxiety, you don't even notice you have it. You just think it's normal. You have this sense that there's this unexpressed, unconscious suffering that's, you have no way to contextualize it, to grapple with it psychologically. Having a word for something completely changes the game when it comes to the way you think about that thing. Language is information encoded in such a way that it can be transferred from brain to brain. Once you name and label a thing, your linear consciousness can kick in and connect it to other ideas. Until that information has a definite compartment within your brain, it can't interact with your other concepts and grow into deeper understanding. Words let you shine a light on impulses and transform them into thoughts. Imagine, just hypothetically, you're the first person to ever figure out words. Like, you're the first person to figure out you can say a series of sounds to get information into somebody else's head and then to notice that's what you did. Imagine you're with Ugg, your buddy Ugg, and you're like, grab rock. And Ugg's like, oh shit, this motherfucker's spitting. Picks up a rock. And you realize that you just used words to express an impulse in your brain to get something outside of you to go forward and change the world in front of you. Oh damn, he really grabbed that rock. I'm a god, whoa. The phenomenal cosmic power. Grab rock. So logos, the Greek word for reason, is also the Greek word for word. Language and reason are seen in many ancient disciplines as being one and the same. Without one, the other is useless. It makes language take on this weird, hyper-important spiritual character that just, you never really think about, do you? Like, you don't have time to, you know? Like, I gotta go to Quick Trip and buy burritos. I can't just constantly be aware of the fact that I'm an unprecedentedly powerful sorcerer in the world when I ask for a burrito. Language, logos, reason, it's the principle of order and knowledge, according to Heraclitus. Marcus Aurelius said that it was the only part of being that was important at all. A little flesh, a little breath, and a reason to rule all. In the beginning, there was the Word. I mean, there's so many quotable ancient phrases that talk about the divinity inherent in the human ability to speak. So this is what I mean by the human element and by human energy. What is human energy? It's consciousness. So Anthromancer is just a fancy way of expressing the transformation of human consciousness. And how does that transformation occur? Through language, through communication, through the communication of ideas. Really, everyone does this all the time. That's all we do. That's all, like, being a human is being an Anthromancer. Being a human is a matter of, like, to be an effective and functioning member of society, you have to be constantly communicating with the people around you. Buy someone a gift, you transform their consciousness. Insult someone, you transform their consciousness. Print up a t-shirt, make a vine. You're transforming consciousness all the time. That's all you're doing all day long. The fact that we take it for granted might limit our power with it, which is kind of part of what I want to express with this. I want to recontextualize the things that we take for granted. When consciousness is transformed, human beings behave differently than they would have preceding that transformation. We go forth and we act as an emergent result of our state of consciousness. And the world itself becomes changed as a result of the subtleties of our consciousness, of what we give our attention to. That's power. Let's take it a little bit further. The theory of quantum mechanics has some pretty interesting stuff to say about the nature of consciousness interacting with reality. Nothing can be said to be one way or another unless somebody is watching it. The famous Schrodinger's cat paradox expresses that. You can't know if the cat is alive or dead until you open the box and see whether it's alive or dead. And until then, functionally, it is both alive and dead. Thanks, quantum. This is also expressed it's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where you cannot know for sure what the momentum, what the direction and speed of motion of a quantum particle is if you know its location, because the act of observing it changes its momentum. And likewise, if you know its momentum, you can't know exactly where it is because it's uncertain. I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm not, like, I read a couple books. But there is an implication here, which is that what you choose to observe and the way you choose to observe it changes physical reality. And there's no scientific way to account for that objectively yet. We do not yet have an understanding of physical reality deep enough for our consciousness itself not to be manipulating all the results we get in all of our experiments. We've looked as close as we can, and we're still not there. We have more questions than we've ever had. And the implication seems to be that consciousness is influencing, whether or not it's actually manipulating physical reality, it is influencing all we understand about it. And that influences the conclusions we draw, it influences the results, it influences the science, and what happens as a result of that. So even on the smallest level of the physical world, consciousness is determining what we learn. There's a weird catch-22 in the free will / determinism philosophical argument that goes back to the dawn of philosophy. Like, our actions, our decisions are the result of subtle processes that are taking place deep within our minds without our conscious awareness. But what we choose to observe transforms our reality, that which we choose to dignify with our own minds. But it gets even crazier, because how do I know that I'm choosing to do anything? How do I know what choice even is? If my decision to make this video, for instance, if my decision to make Anthromancer is just a series of inevitabilities so to speak, like because of when I was born, because I was raised in a certain way, because of various forms of privilege and opportunity and getting the chance to play Final Fantasy when I was a kid. And then later on, having access to the internet and discovering these words that triggered emotional responses that were deeper because of my experience with these games and franchises as a kid. At what point in there am I choosing any of that? At what point in there is the choice anything but an illusion? Like, where in the chain of cause and effect does the concept of free will actually come into play? Where am I actually able to evaluate everything and choose something that I wouldn't have chosen automatically just by virtue of my context? I'm making this video because I need money. I'd like to profit off of this so I can have money so I can eat. I didn't really choose to be a life form that needs to eat, or that was born in a society where you need money. You need to do something productive to make money, get people to back you on Patreon and buy your product, go to Kickstarter, all that stuff. I also take joy in this. Like, this is very fulfilling for me because it gives me a chance to use my passion, my skills, my talents. But how many of those did I choose? Did I choose for this to give me joy? Did I choose for the things that I got good at to give me the positive feedback they gave me to the point where I would get good at those things? Like, I didn't decide to have the impulse to make this video or this board game. It just manifested. And it manifested because of a whole litany of things that were completely outside of my control. Things I had no say in, no choice in. And yeah, here we are. Now, maybe at a certain point I chose to listen to impulses as opposed to ignore them or suppress them. But why did I choose that? Why did I choose to listen to them instead of ignore them? Well, because I've learned lessons through my life that has made my brain more likely to pick those lessons in those situations and decide to do the thing instead of not do the thing. My brain calculated that it made more sense to go ahead and do this because I have the resources, I have the network, I have people that can help me make it make sense. It was very easy though. It wasn't like I had two equally likely outcomes and I flipped a coin. It's more that this just made perfect sense. So you just follow the path of least resistance, and here you are, making videos. I mean, shoot, sometimes I decide to drink until I throw up. Did my brain decide that? Did I decide that? Did I choose it? Or did it just happen? So where exactly does free will come into play? But by the same token, where would determinism come into play? I know everything I just said seems awfully deterministic, but there's a funny thing about quantum mechanics. If human consciousness is bound by the laws of physics, and if the laws of physics, as we currently understand them, indicate that on the smallest level, reality itself doesn't necessarily behave in rational ways, it follows that our thought patterns don't necessarily behave in rational, predictable ways. Perhaps we aren't bound by our memories of past experience. Perhaps we aren't bound by our fears and hopes about future experience. If on the subtlest level our minds aren't actually constrained by linear mechanical logic, then the entire worldview that supposes a deterministic law to human consciousness is flawed. It's built on sand. What I'm trying to get at here is that the free will determinism philosophical conversation seems like it's missing something. Seems like there's an inherent flaw to it. Why do we argue over it being one or the other? Why do people feel so sure that it's one or the other? What if it's both? What if, based on the quality of consciousness we currently inhabit, we exist in a kind of free will determinism superposition? What if that's the whole point of every meditation practice, Zen, wisdom tradition in the world? What if all those books and stories and teachers saying things like, be here now, be in the moment, be present where you are? What if that's the only way to be free? What if bringing yourself to the present moment and observing present experience is the only way to truly find liberation, any kind of meaningful freedom from this sort of physical prison of reality where all of your actions and all of your decisions are based entirely upon past experience? What if only when our minds are paying attention to what is directly in front of us can we be considered to be free? This idea finds some support in the writings of one of my favorite old magician weirdos, Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner has some really awesome things to say about the nature of creativity. and the nature of the spirit. Things that I think that are profoundly valuable, and I would love to see more people talking about them. Specifically, it was Steiner's writing on creativity, intuition, imagination, and inspiration. Those were the big words that contextualized my own creative process in something spiritual. Hence all the weird purple crap I have now. So Rudolf Steiner suggested that the act of creating was the most immediately available method that human beings had to touch the divine, to sense the spiritual realm for yourself, your own personal perception. And as I read that, as I sort of thought through that, I realized that, like, as an artist, and you can talk to a lot of artists and they'll say similar things, my best work is always done when I'm flowing, when I am not present, when my consciousness just dissipates. And even as I scripted out the notes for this video, like, you start typing and you get an idea and you just start going. And if while you're doing that, you become mindful and pay attention to, like, what your brain's doing, it's not doing much. You've become this vessel from the impulse. Your creative impulse goes straight past your consciousness and out your hands or your mouth or whatever form of creativity you happen to be doing. Even as I'm talking right here, like, it's like I'm voicing thoughts, but I'm not necessarily conscious of them. There's this void, this blankness that takes over, where you sort of become this vessel for these arguably countless quantum reactions taking place in your head all simultaneously, and you just, and then you got a thing that you made, you got a thing that you did. In Steiner's opinion, that was what spiritual experience looked like, and it was the act of creating art that unlocked it for people. Inspiration, imagination, intuition. 3 forms of divine power manifesting through art. It's extra fun that the only reason I even stumbled on this guy, the only reason I even discovered him at all, was because of the similarities between the philosophy he founded, the word similarities between the philosophy he founded called anthroposophy, and the board game I was working on, which I'd been calling Anthromancer for several years. It was I was reading a Wikipedia article about tarot cards or something, and the word anthroposophy showed up, and I thought, anthroposophy, anthromancy, well, that's similar. Clicked on it, found out about Steiner, found out all these other ideas, and I just remember sitting in a coffee shop going through them, creating and realizing the gravity of them, realizing how fascinating it was to contextualize reality and the artistic process as something inherently divine, inherently spiritual. It's certainly not something I had experienced beforehand. It's certainly not an idea I'd ever particularly given credence to or been exposed to as a kid. I mean, maybe I had to discover it on my own, but I certainly think that our culture could use more of that. If you sit and think about it for long enough, creating stuff is incredibly powerful. It's the core of power. Being able to influence human thought, being able to make somebody think about the world differently, the amount of physical change that causes in the world on a long enough timeline is literally incalculable. Lo and behold, there I was stumbling through Wikipedia, and I find some crazy old 19th century occultist who just happens to have written about all the stuff I'm interested in. There's actually the first modern magician video is about Rudolf Steiner, so click the box. Does our culture in general understand this stuff? No, you need a weird nerd in an expensive suit jacket to tell it to you on YouTubes. A lot of these ideas aren't common knowledge. They're not something people just talk about. They're certainly not water cooler talk, and I kind of wish they were. I kind of feel like our entire spiritual situation in the world, all the stuff that's going on, would be less awful if we were more in touch with these things, if we were more in touch with a sense of the divine, a sense of universal meaning. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with Anthromancer. It's what I want to passively inspire. You know, I understand it can't be active. If you're too active with this stuff, you know what happens? You start a cult. I don't want to start a cult. At the end of the day, I'm not preaching anything here. I don't know what path your life should take, and I don't have the authority to tell you that, and I have no interest in controlling it. I don't want your fealty. I want to inspire. I want to spark curiosity and make people a little bit more open to some of these seemingly inaccessible esoteric ideas. I know that I certainly had to go digging for them, and like I didn't know that's what I would find when I went digging, because I wasn't digging for them. I was digging, honestly, I was trying to do research to make my board game as cool as I could. And it was through researching ancient games and the aesthetics of old world and mythology and all these sorts of things that I was led down this path. And now I want to try and share some of that with people. I want, like, it's not just the game is cool, it's also I want people to share in my experience of having created it. Like, I have observed a dearth of wisdom in the way that we talk about things on TV shows and on the news media, like the way we conduct our affairs in geopolitics and all that kind of stuff. And it's not like I'm the only person who sees this. People have been writing about how unsustainable our way of doing things has been for ages. Everyone from freaking Karl Marx to ayahuasca shamans in the Amazon, like, everybody seems to have some baseline understanding of how we're destroying the planet that gives us life, and why are we doing that? Depending upon your particular school of thought, the idea I subscribe to is that we're doing it because we're not spiritually grounded. There's a greed and a desperation at work in all of the institutions that we're holding up. And I don't think you can change that. You can't transform that without a deeper look at where it comes from. You know, initially Anthromancer was just a game. It was something akin to those card battle games I played as a kid, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon. Magi Nation, anybody? No? Nobody's heard of it. It's fine. I certainly didn't have any grand spiritual goal for it. I was just sitting around like a bored kid thinking, ooh, wouldn't it be cool if I made a game? A series of decisions which were fairly straightforward and mundane led me down a path to it becoming the weird cryptic nonsense it is now. And if you look at any of those individual decisions, they make sense in the context of good business. Like, oh, if I get rid of a deck building system and instead build the mechanics around a single deck of cards using traditional card values, I won't have to pay for play testing and art for all those cards. Like, as an entrepreneur, that's something that makes it more feasible. I can make this game with a limited budget because I don't need an army of people to play test and illustrate them. Or, oh, if I research the history of cards, I can come up with an aesthetic that grounds it in that history and is more appealing to the average consumer. Or, oh, if I study how tarot works, maybe I could incorporate tarot elements to add value to the product so that it is even more good for the consumer. All of these decisions are business decisions. They're boring, logic-minded, how do I sell this at some point? How do I justify its existence so other people will want to support it? Now, don't get me wrong, I certainly enjoy having my ego validated. I like getting on camera and talking about all this stuff, and I like the idea that somebody would come along and be like, wow, man, this stuff is so deep, it's so cool, you really did it, man, it's great, wow. Yeah, I like that idea. I'm a human being. Sorry. But I don't really feel like I decided for Anthromancer to become what it did. I feel like this happened because it made sense for it to happen exactly the way it did. And I didn't decide for it to make sense. But shoot, maybe I did. I read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Do I have that? 1 second. No time at all. No time at all. Haha. Start With Why. This is by a guy named Simon Sinek, who has an ironic last name because he is not very cynical. He's a motivational speaker. He's got the second most watched TED Talk of all time, and it's about his ideas expressed in this book, about how businesses that really succeed in the world and that manage to not only survive, but thrive in hard circumstances and unfriendly markets do so because they operate their business from a central principle, a core organizing principle that he calls a why. He talks about like why is it that people will buy a phone from a computer company such as Apple? Why is it that people will continue to buy airline flights from a company like Southwest even in the wake of something terrible like the 9/11 attacks? Why are these companies able to continue to make profit even when things are bad? And what he observes is that these companies all seem to organize and operate and communicate based on a core organizing principle, a purpose. With Apple, it's something like their Think Different slogan. They have branded themselves as an option for people who want to go against the grain, for people who want to start their upstart companies in a garage, just like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak did. For Southwest, you're flying the friendly skies. They've transformed something that was when Southwest was founded, only available to the wealthy, something that was a thing that people with money did, into something that was available to the working class. They made flying affordable for regular people. The thing about the why is that it isn't necessarily about having a better product. Because when you have a strong purpose and a strong organizing principle, as long as your product works, people don't necessarily care if it's best. Because when they buy your product, they're not just buying your product, they're also supporting your vision. If you've articulated a vision, if you've gone out of your way to make sure that people understand what your why is, why you're doing it, people will connect with your brand. Even if not as many people buy it, the people who do buy it will keep coming back and they'll keep supporting you. So long as you stay true to what your why is, so long as you don't violate your own principles. I think you could make an argument that certain companies, like Apple, have gotten into a situation where things have revealed, the fact that they've gotten in trouble for retroactively making phones worse. That's not a very Apple thing to do based upon all of their branding, and that offends people on a deeper level. It is much more offensive to the human spirit to be betrayed than it is to be attacked. I think about this when I think about, I get into conversations about Donald Trump, about why Donald Trump is the president of the United States of America. It's because why can he get away with doing all of these heinous things and behaving in such reprehensible ways? It's because it's on brand for him. Because he's never branded himself as a good man. He's never branded himself as anything except the way he behaves now. Like, whether or not that involves actual objective lies, which, it does in Trump's case, there's something more off-putting to our emotional values, to our emotional responses to things when somebody violates their brand identity than it is when that brand identity itself is something not necessarily wholesome. Sinek talks about that in this, and it has influenced a lot of the way I think about Anthromancer and all the stuff I'm working on. After I read Start With Why, after I was exposed to Simon Sinek's work, there was really no way for me to continue working on this without thinking about it. What was my why? Why was I making this product? Why was I creating a board game? Was it just money? Was it power? Was I trying to make myself famous for creating a board game? What was my organizing principle? Because if it's just money, that's not a why. That's just business. That's just what people do, right? Like, there's nothing that sets any business. If your organizing principle is to make profit, that's a company like Dell. And you don't have people standing in the rain for 12 hours to get the new Dell phone. Because there's nothing emotionally accessible about making money. Nobody cares if you want to make money. You're in business, you're selling me a thing. Obviously you want to make money. You need to make money in this economy. But there's nothing in that for the average person. And as a creator, there's nothing fulfilling about that being my goal. Like, if I'm just here to make money, and then die, what's the point? Why do this? Why spend all this time and effort and energy? Why work into the night making meticulous little millimeter changes on art assets and figure out shipping costs and all this stuff if the only thing I'm trying to do is make money? If my goal is making money, I'll probably make less of it because I'm not giving people anything. I'm not serving them anything that makes them feel compelled to buy it. The soul searching that I was doing related to this, trying to figure out the why of my product, it was all happening during the 2016 US presidential elections. And it was the conclusions I came to were certainly influenced by the fact that I just had a series of I got political whiplash from having conversations with my parents about politics. I have a big family, and we all have varying political views. I have more right-wing leaning dad and stepmother. I have a left-wing leaning mom and stepdad. And I remember being just blindsided by my inability to politically communicate with any of it. I figured at least one of them I'd be able to talk about this stuff with, but it was just, the whole thing was toxic. Every single person, every political conversation I had, and a large degree of it was my own, the fear I was holding on for myself, the fear I was feeling as a response of looking at the elections and worrying about what the future was going to be. and I couldn't communicate. We couldn't talk to each other in a way that made a meaningful difference. Politics became, it's the rude thing that nobody brings up because there's no way to have a meaningful political communication without it becoming toxic. I was not expecting the kind of emotional conflict I ended up having. I mean, especially not with like my left-leaning family, because I've always come to the conclusion that I'm left-leaning based on, political ideology and stuff, but I got to a point where I was having like psychic desperation, like panic attacks. And you can only have so many of those before you realize that like you're thinking about something wrong. You're doing something in the wrong way. Something isn't clicking. Something isn't right. At some point I realized that I was being a fool. The fool. A big old dummy. Fool realizations are interesting because they're effortless when you have them. And arguably they're always available to you except when you can't see them. Because we're always fools. We're foolish. We are mortals. Our brains are literally just a couple pounds of fat with some electrical wiring in them, making us hallucinate reality all the time. We are not smart. And we're constantly deluding ourselves into certain truths that aren't truths. We're constantly convincing ourselves of certain perspectives that are not objective. And yet one little drop of humility, one reminder of how little we know, can often be all it takes to snap you back and remind you that it's okay, that you're okay, and bring you back to the present moment and stop living in the future, stop worrying about what it's gonna be, stop letting your fear dictate your actions. And when I realized that I was being a fool, I was suddenly able to look at the unfolding political opera with a totally different lens. All of it was recontextualized for me. I started to see how fear was underlying these dearths of communication with people that I love and cherish and ought to be able to communicate with. My fear of their perspective, my fear that they lacked the correct perspective that I had, made it so that we couldn't even reach one another. My ego, my belief that I am not a fool and they are, that I am the one who has the truth, I am the one who knows what's really going on, made it so that none of us could gain anything from speaking to each other. I realized how all of us are being polarized into being bad communicators, manipulated into this sense that our perspective has to be defended with knives and guns because the other perspective is that of the bad guys. Both sides of the aisle were becoming bigger villains to one another, specifically because of how much they perceived the other side to be the villain. It feels like people are going to hear this as apologizing for evil or apologizing for wrongness, but what I noticed is that the people, no matter where people fell politically, they were saying the same things and just charging them on different parts of the spectrum. Understanding wasn't being fostered, distrust and hatred was. Still is. But once I realized that, a couple things occurred to me. First, you can't scream someone into agreeing with you. You can't build consensus with hostility. And you can't avoid hostility if you're full of pride. If you want to build consensus, if you want to have a meaningful conversation with somebody, you have to have humility. You have to recognize you're a fool and carry that energy into that conversation. Second, political action isn't the root of change. There's a deeper root than that, and that's human consciousness. Our actions are not the lowest level. They are an outgrowth of our state of mind, of our level of awareness, of our spiritual health. If we're a bunch of spiritually ignorant fear-mongers, then we're gonna create a shit show hellscape. One-to-one, input-output. And that's kind of what the world seems like it is right now, doesn't it? So it occurred to me that political activism is meaningless unless the person performing it operates from a grounded base of spiritual well-being, of wholeness. What good is fighting for what you believe in if what you believe in is that we are all doomed and the only thing to do is destroy your enemies? What good is being alive if you use your precious temporary existence to just spread the unconscious fear and panic that you so desperately wish to escape? It's cultural messages, books, movies, music, ideas that change reality. It's education, teaching, guiding, sharing, learning that makes for a better future. It's popularizing the exploration of what it means to be human that offers us a meaningful path out of mutual annihilation. If you live your life flattening other human personalities into the labels you see them as, you're practically living in the second dimension. There's so much information, so much depth to every human soul that you're missing, that you're ignoring, you're blind to if you see the world that way. The amount of truth you miss when doing that is profound. It's like, I do not believe that people are stupid, and I do not believe that people are evil. I believe that people are people. They're energy forms that are the product of their experiences. Until we become the kind of civilization that understands this, we will never master ourselves. Until we become compassionate enough to look at the dichotomy of good and evil as energy forms that can be transformed, we will not escape that dichotomy. Until we're able to accept one another and reality itself as it is, we won't be able to be present, and we won't have free will. Our fates will not be determined by the virtue of our own creative intelligence, but rather by the fear-based impulses of the most foolish among us. Politics doesn't matter if we don't approach it holistically. If we aren't looking any deeper than the surface level, the unemployment numbers, the statistics, what does that mean? Like, you have to understand that those are symbols that represent human energy, human beings, contexts, stories. And politics won't mean anything unless we're able to grapple with that. And we can't do that if we're afraid. And what are we afraid of? Really, like on the deep, I'm afraid of not being able to get food at the store. What is that fear from? I'm afraid of pain. I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid of loss. I'm afraid of suffering. All of those are inevitable. You cannot live a life without experiencing those things. Every life, no matter how rich or how poor or how privileged or how oppressed, every life is filled with suffering. Every life comes to an end. Everyone you love, you'll lose. Life is temporary. And so why are we afraid of suffering? Because our culture hasn't prioritized wisdom. Because we haven't internalized the lessons that are there for us to learn about this stuff. We haven't spent enough time staring at the void. We haven't spent enough time realizing that you can't get away from it. All of our decisions are governed by this unconscious impulse to resist the inevitable and to fight back against the inevitable and to run from the inevitable. It's fear that's governing all of our political decisions, our economic decisions, and we're not gonna get any of this right until we address that kernel, that root of all of it. We want to escape rather than sit and face it. And so I guess that kind of became my why for Anthromancer, is that I wanted to create an escape that helps you face it. And maybe it's crazy, maybe that's like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I completely recognize the absurdity of somebody thinking that they could make a board game that addressed this stuff. Like, I'm just some asshole, man. I'm just some asshole who spent too much money on a jacket. But it's meaningful to try, right? It's meaningful to try and have this influence, because if all of the stuff I'm saying about the power of communication and language and art to tap into the spiritual and communicate something meaningful to the world, if any of that's true, then it's true for this as much as it is anything else. I also know that what I want for it won't work if I try to make a cult out of it. Like, it's not that. I mean, I should stop saying. Hold on. I also recognize that what my why is, my purpose here, what I'm trying to do with Anthromancer, won't work if it's presented as something that you have to subscribe to. This is service. This is something that's meant to be a lot of value in a small box. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to bring you and your friends together to play a fun strategy board game. If you're interested in oracles, I tried to make the best oracle I could, something that would make you feel good and make you want to use it. I tried to make beautiful music that would accompany all the hymn cards and make it something that you weren't annoyed listening to. And I tried to make the story something that wasn't overly preachy and was just a fascinating and curious read. It's in your hands. It's not I can't make you understand what I'm trying to make you understand. You have to understand it yourself. It's the Hermetic wisdom, the principle of the alchemists. Like, you just go into a cabin in the woods somewhere and sit around like Thoreau until you realize, oh, snap, we're all gonna die, and that's okay. But I hoped that I could spark the curiosity, spark a desire to find that peace, that stability in these chaotic times, so that moving forward, we can all build something better together. Something that doesn't suck the life out of us every day. I just want to make it cool to be wise, fam. Before I finish this video, I wanted to explain the symbolic relationship between the Fool and the Fox. The two most important cards in Anthromancer. I wanted to explain what they mean and why I said all this other nonsense. The Fool represents lessons, ignorance, toil, anxiety. It's a card of pain and suffering. It's a card that represents the slings and arrows of life through which we gain wisdom. And the Fox represents laughter, bliss, flow, and serenity. And on the surface level, it's the polar opposite of the Fool. But what characterizes the bliss and the flow and the serenity of the Fox is a very simple thing. The Fool wants to be the Fox, but the Fox knows that it's a fool. All right, there we go. That's that. That's enough. We talked a lot. Here's all my crazy. If you like this video, we invite you to like it. We would love it if you would subscribe to the channel so you can get updates for new videos. Click the bell so that you know when those go live. We've got some more Dragon Fruit and Oracle ASMR videos to share with you guys. What's this over here? It's about, oh right, Anthromancer is live on Kickstarter on May 5th, which should be tomorrow if we release this on the right time, but I have no control over anything, so I guess we'll see. If you guys were not turned off by the last 30 to 45 minutes of spieling I just gave you, it would be super cool. Like extremely cool if you would go over to the Kickstarter and support it. We're shipping internationally. Like, you can totally get Anthromancer if you want to, and it would totally help me out. That'd be great. As long as I'm asking you for your money. We also have a Patreon set up now. The link to that is going to be in the description. So please, again, if you like what we're trying to do here, what I'm trying to do with Anthromancer, it would be so cool if you would support it. Oh my God, I could pay Ben more money than I already pay him to edit these and make me look like I know what I'm talking about. We would love to see you engage with us on our social channels. It's at Anthromancy on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you want to follow me for whatever reason, you can find me at Daniel J. Drake or at Daniel James Drake on Twitter and Instagram, respectively. And of course, you can find out more about Anthromancer at anthromancer.com. I've actually got the entire rule book digitized, so you can browse all the different games you can play with it and how to do alchemy, and you can listen to the album and read the myth, and all that stuff is available on anthromancer.com right now. And yeah, I think that's about it. I'm gonna go play Final Fantasy VII Remake right now, because like, that shit is dope. Have a good day, guys.